From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
When the voters go to the polls on Tuesday, November the 3rd in Idaho, one of the important issues on the ballot will be what is called Initiative 1, or the 1% initiative dealing with property tax in Idaho. Today we're going to have guests both in support and in opposition to the 1% initiative. In the first half of the program, our guest will be Mr. Ron Rankin, who is the author of the 1% initiative. He is also the president of the Idaho Property Owners Association. He is also an independent candidate for the Idaho State Senate in Legislative District Number 4. Mr. Rankin, welcome to our program, and we'd like to discuss this issue with you, and if you wish to make some comment about your candidacy, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you.
Would you start the program out by indicating to us what we mean by the 1% initiative in relation to property tax in Idaho?
What the 1% initiative does, among other things, it limits the tax rate, the total tax rate that can be charged on property, to 1% of the actual market value subject to taxation, which means after your agricultural exemption, after your timber exemption, or after your 50-50 homeowners exemption, that portion that's left will be taxed at no more than 1%. Currently in Coeur d'Alene it's 2.2%. In the cities in the Silver Valley it's 3.5%. But this limits, the idea is to limit government, to let the growth in government pay for the growth in the services that are demanded, and to right a wrong that's been done. The people passed this initiative similar in 1978. They passed a homeowners exemption by initiative in 82. Now this is the third time in 14 years, and the reason for this, the last vestige of the 78 1% was removed last year by the legislature when they lifted the cap. There is no more limit on the increases in the property taxes that can be made.
So in relation to the 1%, you're saying that you could tax up to 1% of the actual market value of the property, and you've indicated that some...
Subject to taxation.
Right, correct. And some localities have above 1%, but are there also some localities in Idaho that are below the 1%?
The Blaine County, down where Sun Valley and some of these wealthier areas, they are currently below 1%. That doesn't mean that they're going to be raised to 1%. What it means is that property tax rates shall not exceed 1% of the taxable value, or of the value subject to taxation.
A second question on that same line. As an area grows and develops, such as Ada County or Kootenai County, and with that growth there is an increase in the value of property, under the 1%, the assessor still would be obligated under law to come in and to raise the actual market value if the property is going up in that area. In other words, 1% does not in any way affect the ability for the value of property to increase.
No, it doesn't. They had that as a part of the initiative in 1978, and under Idaho Constitution that's not legal because you have to tax all property equally.
Excuse me, is that in the Constitution of Idaho?
In the Constitution of Idaho. In 78, for instance, where they were limiting or trying to limit to a 2% growth in the value annually, and it would make property built today and property built 2 years from now that were identical be of different values, different taxable values, so therefore deemed unconstitutional under Idaho law.
But you have indicated that there are other statutes in which there are certain exemptions for some property.
That's the homeowners exemption, timber, and ag exemptions that are part of other statutes in the Idaho codes that are not affected by the 1% initiative.
You were on this program some months ago, about 8 or 10 months ago, and we also talked about the Constitution of Idaho has built into that document about bond issues for capital, for example, building a new high school, for example. That requires, when the election is held, of all of those people who actually vote in that election, a 2/3 majority for approval. That obviously could not be addressed in the 1% initiative because that's a statute rather than a constitutional amendment. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, Tony, and I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to, and it saved me a little bit of my time. There's a lot of misinformation on that and a couple of other issues. One, those provisions are in the Constitution, cannot be addressed or cannot be altered by initiative. Therefore, the 2/3 of those voting stands. There are two other issues that are of concern to me that where there is, I'll be a gentleman today and say false information that's being put out and being promoted throughout the state mainly by people that are on the public payroll. One of them is that we're going to have a 30% cut. Now let me explain that. They say the State Tax Commission in 1991, based on 1991 assessed values, said that with a 1% in, we would lose the taxing agencies would lose $114 million. That was 30% of the total that's collected. So therefore they've applied that 30%, across the board as losses for these various taxing districts. The half-truth that's being told over and over and repeated is that there will be 30% cuts, when in fact it's 30% cut in only that portion of the budget funded by property tax. Let me give you a for instance. When the Hospital Association came out against the 1%, they're talking about taking a 30% hit on the hospitals. In Kootenai County, the Kootenai Medical Center, people had visions of people out on the sidewalk in gurneys and wheelchairs that couldn't get in, because there's no budget or whatever. The 30% cut in property tax revenues in that portion of the budget for Kootenai Medical Center is less than 1% in their entire budget. In the schools, it's 30% of 28% of the funding that comes from the state. It's different all over on these different taxing districts, but they use this 30%. That's like Chicken Littles, and the sky is falling in when in fact it isn't. The other major point that's been come up here in the last couple of weeks is, and I'm sure you've seen this, our pillars of academia, all four of them, have said that University of Idaho is going to lose $10 million. Idaho State's going to lose 15% of its budget. BSU is going to lose $6 million. LCSC, they're still worrying about whether it's going to be 6, 8, or 10 million. The point is, none of those universities, not one of them, get not one dime from property taxes.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
on that? And that is, are they possibly saying, though, that when the school districts lose that money, if the state legislature takes revenue to take to the local school districts, they might take it from the colleges? Are they possibly saying that?
The operative word there is might. And what I'm saying, they're saying this is an absolute. What they're doing, they're bearing up, and you hit the point right on the head. What they're saying is what I've said for a year and a half. The schools will not be hurt in any way by this. They will not be impacted in any way, because we know historically, we know year by year, the legislature will not let the schools take a loss. Steve Aarons, the head of the Idahoans Against, has said the schools won't take a loss. All four universities have said the schools won't take a loss. They're basing their projected losses on the fact that the schools will not, in fact, take a loss.
If the schools, don't take a loss and they go to the state to get that revenue, do you have a recommendation? Should it be increase in taxes in other areas or taken from other programs?
Well,
there is not a surplus.
I have a recommendation. Okay. When we talk about taking from other areas or additional taxes, let me just tell you, in the last 10 years, this population has grown 6% in Idaho. The state general fund budget has grown 125%. The schools last year, this budget year we're in, got more in general fund appropriations than the entire state budget was 8 years ago. What I'm saying is this budget is going up, at an unbelievable rate. At the same time, in 5 years, our good governor here has increased non-education state employees by 4,483, or a 25% increase. All we have to do is have a freeze on expansion of government, and the funding of the schools can be picked up.
There's another area that I want to get to, and then I want to give you a little chance on your candidacy. Another provision in the 1% initiative that's caused a lot of debate around the state, not in bond area, but
right,
with levies for schools. If a local community wishes to adopt a levy, we've been doing that over the years, or even some special levies for other services other than schools. Under the initiative that you have authored, it indicates that 2/3 of all qualified electors would have to come out and vote yes for those levies to pass. And I know there's even a debate where that means registered voters or everyone that's eligible to register and vote. But even if it's registered voters, what do you think, Mr. Rankin, is the chances of getting that many people out to vote for? In fact, the opposition to the 1% has argued that it would mean the death of all levies. How would you respond?
I would say that that's pretty close. What we've done is try to keep this within the limits of being possible, but being as nearly impossible as we could. The reason for that, we've made no bones about it, the reason for that is the schools have become addicted to overrides, to fund teacher raises every year. We want to get the funding of the schools off of the property tax. If it is extremely difficult or nearly impossible to pass overrides, then we feel that we'll be taking an unwilling bride, at least in helping us to lever the legislature to get the funding off the property tax and onto the state general fund. That's leverage, and we've made no bones about that. That was done on purpose to make it extremely difficult.
I think we've covered most areas. I know there's an opinion from the Attorney General about the constitutionality of that, but I won't have time to go into that with you unless you just really want to deal with that, because we have about 2 or 3 minutes left to deal with your candidacy. Or you might want to take 30 seconds or so to deal with that the Attorney General issued an opinion that he thought that there was constitutional legal problems with the initiative.
Well, if that were so, now I think he's very self-serving in his opinions, but if that were so, and if he were legitimately concerned, and the antis were legitimately concerned that it was constitutional and felt it'd be tossed out anyway, why in the world? So far they spent $250,000 to defeat it. Why not spend $20,000 on a lawyer and have it thrown out? You know, that's bogus, but he's entitled to his opinion. But his opinions, the respect for his opinions, I think, are limited to his staff.
Well, thank you for addressing those issues. Now, I indicated that you are an independent candidate for the State Senate from District 4. Would you like to address any issue or your candidacy in any way?
Sure. I'd like to compare my candidacy with that of my opponent, Mary Lou Reed. While she has voted to fund 4,000 plus new state employees, while she's voted to double state spending in the time that she's been in office, in 6 years as president of the Kootenai County Property Owners Association, I spearheaded campaigns that have saved county taxpayers over $200 million. In my year and a half as president of the Idaho Property Owners Association, I've caused the 1% initiative to get on the ballot and to try and protect the physical integrity, at least, of the people that pay the bills. There's a vast difference between us. And I'd like to say, before the time runs out, that this 1% initiative is, in fact, an environmental issue. Now, by passing the 1% initiative, it's going to cut down on the funds that are available from the county to hire lawyers to put the new county dump over the Rockford Bay drainage, killing off all of the cutthroat trout. Is going to keep the funds cut down so that the Hayden Lake Sewer District can't hire the same lawyer, her husband, to represent them to pump 250,000 gallons of sewage into the Spokane River.
On that note, I'm going to have to bring the program to conclusion. For the other half, so we can have the other side of the 1% issue. Mr. Rankin, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
On the second part of our program today, we are going to have the opponents of the 1% Initiative. I welcome to the program, first of all, Mr. Jack Beebe, who is owner of Beebe McKernan and McCarty in Idaho. He's also co-chair of the North Idahoans Against the 1% Initiative, and he's also the immediate past chair of the North Idaho College Board of Trustees. And our second guest is Lori Barnes, who is the chair of the Legislative Committee of the Coeur d'Alene Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to both of you, and I know you want to use the time that you have for your position. My first question is to you, Jack. Would you tell us a little bit about this organization, I believe called a coalition, that's opposing the 1% Initiative?
Surely, Tony. First of all, I want to thank you very much for having both Lori and I on your program. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you and to your audience about something that's very dear to the both of us and also to the Idaho Coalition Against the 1%. I've been involved in a great number of programs over the years in various different organizations, and I don't think I've ever been involved with a group that has a wider diversity than the 1% against the group that's against the 1% Initiative. We've got Republicans and Democrats and young people and retirees and political types on both ends of the aisle, and so it's been a great pleasure to work with them. We want you to know that our group is here to stay. We're going to stay involved with tax reform. We recognize that there are some things that need to be done, but after this 1% Initiative hopefully is defeated, then we're going to spend some time working with our legislators to not have a meat axe approach to tax reform, but instead have something that's going to work for the benefit of all of us.
Lori, along some of those lines, we had in the first part of the program, one of the supporters of the initiative. There's a lot of debate back and forth and information and misinformation. Would you like to address what happens this way in campaigns and clear up any points from your perspective?
Sure. As always seems to happen in a political campaign, you have misinformation coming from both sides, and it's no different on this one. Some of the people against the 1% Initiative have said that it would remove the homeowners exemption, and that's absolutely false. Some of the people that support the 1% Initiative have said that it will automatically cut your taxes in half and there will be no loss of services. That obviously is also false too. The initiative itself does two major things. First off, it does limit the taxes you will pay on the market value of your property to 1%. Secondly, it changes the voting requirements. It would require 2/3 of all registered voters to vote in favor of an issue to pass it. Now back to the homeowners exemption. That issue is not dealt with in the initiative at all. I think the misinformation has come from some elected officials that have said, yes, that would be an option. If they feel that they need to replace revenues, removing the homeowners exemption
but that
would be an
option. The legislature could
Right, but it is not dealt with in the initiative itself at all. On the second issue of cutting your taxes in half, there are many areas in the state that are below 1% right now. And to say that it would not affect services is absurd. If you look at Kootenai County alone, Kootenai County, not the county, the organization, all the taxes that you pay into Kootenai County, we would lose approximately $19.2 million. And that is a 35% cut on the property taxes that were collected in 1992. Now, I think that we all agree that not only government agencies, but maybe even in our own households, we can tighten the belt up a little bit here and there. But I think you'd agree that not many people can take a 35% cut and not lose something. And that's the same way that it is, of course, in the county. And the one thing that both sides do agree on, though, is that there will be a revenue shortfall. Estimates range from $115 million to about $160 million, depending on who you talk to. So the real question of this issue is, Tony, how will the legislature deal with it? They're going to be going down to Boise in January, already facing a $15 to $20 million deficit in the expenditures that they have facing them. On top of that, we're going to give them a shortfall of $115 to $160 million. How are they going to face that?
So there's really two things then. There'd be a shortage both from property tax and this other shortage in the economy.
Right.
But we have to move on. And Jack, Mr. Rankin has stated, who was on our program, that this initiative would save Idaho property owners millions of dollars if it passes. How would you respond to this statement?
Well, Tony, we took a survey and went and kind of looked at the average homeowner's value at home in Kootenai County and found that somewhere in the neighborhood of $85,000 is an average. We have to come to some kind of a conclusion as far as that's concerned, with the 1% saving that homeowner somewhere around $450. Of course, that would vary with some communities with different taxing districts, but that's going to be real close for a matter of discussion. But if we say, okay, we've got a $450 savings, what's that going to cost us that live in Kootenai County? And if, for instance, if you have a student that's going to NIC, or you happen to be a student that's going to NIC, obviously your tuition is going to go up because of the problems we're going to have with our fire districts, no doubt. Our fire insurance is going to go up for your homes. We're going to have difficulty with the county and with the county commissioners and the city people with the fees that they charge us for garbage and for water and for sewer and these other things that these property taxes help pay.
So I hear you saying that you will save it on your property, but you'll pay it out in other things.
I would sure hope to tell you that's going to happen. And the worst of all, of course, is going to be our quality of life, Tony. And what kind of dollar can you put on that value? And I'm real concerned that our quality of life is going to go down. And as far as I'm concerned, our $450 we may pay very dearly for that $450 savings.
Lori, I have a question to you that I've heard too. Everyone's analyzing on both sides of this issue. Reports tell us that about 27.1% of the property in Kootenai County is owned by out-of-state people, and there's an estimated loss, of course, all over the state, but particular a county like Kootenai, that maybe $6.2 million would be lost in revenue with their reduction in property. How can we make up this revenue?
Well, again, that's the question the legislature will be facing. They're going to have two options. One is to allow these vital services to be lost that are now paid for with property taxes. That's fire, it's EMS, it's some of the funding for the schools, your police protection. The state can either take money from the state to pay for those, and if they do that, they're going to have to increase taxes. Now, we have a chart that shows this. The orange color that you see, that shows that we have 56,000 people now paying in to property taxes in Kootenai County. If we take away that, it would have to be replaced by income or sales. You can see the blue shows 24,000 people pay into income tax. So if we have to replace this loss of 19 million with income tax, you can see who will be paying it. You and I, the working people of Idaho, are going to have to make up a big chunk of money that's now coming from a broad base of people.
Okay. Jack, I have another question somewhat along those lines. I've heard some people say that this initiative will send a message to the government that they are tired of paying taxes or property taxes at this level. How would you respond to this message from the supporters of the 1%?
Well, heaven's sakes, Tony, I think all of us feel like we pay too much in taxes. I know I do. Heaven's sakes, you talk about the 20th of December, it gets almost as tough as the 15th of April. So we all feel the tax bite. But at the same time, as the chart that I'm going to show you now, the 89 cents out of every dollar that we spend in taxes goes to state and federal taxes, with 11 cents going to from property tax.
They put that on the screen now if you'd like to see.
Okay, one more time, to bring your attention, the 89 cents of all of the taxes that we pay go to state and federal taxes, while 11 cents comes from property taxes. An important thing is that 11 cents we can control, Tony. In other words, it's collected locally and spent locally, and we can watch those people that are involved with spending our tax dollars, we can watch them closely. And as Lori has already alluded to, if for some reason that property tax is going to be shifted to either sales tax or income tax, which will no doubt happen because of the shortfall, then those dollars are going to end up in Boise. And we all know in North Idaho what it's like to try to get our fair share back to the northern part of the state.
It's my understanding 80% of the legislators in the South, and therefore it's harder to get the dollars back, you're saying, if you have to vote on that.
That's exactly right. We have 20% of the representation, and that's going to cause that we'll probably get less representation, and that way I think that's very unfair.
Lori, we need to move on to you and ask a question about, have you mentioned, I heard you mention that there are two possible results of the passage of the initiative, the loss of services or a tax shift. Which do you think will happen, or both?
Tough question, Tony. And you have some people say if they pass it, we're going to let it stand just as it is. And if people want to take that cut, then we'll see those cuts. But I think anyone that has taken the time to see the devastation those cuts would have on our community would be concerned about that, and they'd look at a tax shift, unfortunately. And I'd like to mention here again, Tony, it would be either an income or a sales tax, and this is not a new issue. This group of people that are meeting have been working on tax reform for a number of years. As a matter of fact, the Chamber of Commerce has backed proposals for a local option tax, and that would allow our community to say, okay, we want to impose a 3-cent gas tax, for example, from May to October, and we'll use those monies to fix our roads. Again, local control, like Jack was talking about. There are other ways to solve this problem than through the 1%. And I hope that some people are going to come up with those ideas.
And there are a number of plans out there, proposed next session of legislature.
Right, that will be coming up to deal with this.
Jack, we've also heard from different people is that what happens in other states that pass, like California Proposition 13 or Oregon Proposition 5, Would you like to respond? Do we have any case studies that show what the effect is after that you pass such an initiative?
Well, Tony, I think everybody's pretty familiar with all the problems California is having with their Proposition 13. I'm not saying that their limitation on property tax is the cause of all their problems, but it certainly hasn't helped them any. And but the thing that's most current and I think is most important to all of us in North Idaho and in the state of Idaho is what's going on in Oregon right now. They passed what they called a Proposition 5 here a year or so ago, and they've been in this program for about a year and a half or so. And we called the governor's office the other day and got some information from the governor and their staff as to what has actually happened because of this proposition. I want to read a few of these to you because it's kind of a devastating thing, and I think this gets right down to the chase of what we're talking about here. But since this has gone on in Oregon, Oregon has lost 5 correctional facilities and they've been closed. The Oregon State Police Department has already eliminated 127 state officers' jobs. 3 Oregon State Police districts have been closed. Discussions underway where to possibly close one of the state colleges, if you can believe that. 1,200 higher education positions have been lost. The state's veterinary medical school is being eliminated. The nursing program is being cut in half. Most master's degree programs are being eliminated, and one education program is being eliminated at the same time. All local governments have lost revenue, cutting back such services as police, fire, roads, and the list goes on and on.
Lori, we're really short on time, but in the beginning you mentioned a change in voting requirements under the 1% initiative, and you've had a lot of experience with levies and voting. Could you tell us a little more about this provision of the 1%?
You bet, and this is one that sometimes is not talked about as much. Currently, the law states that there has to be a certain percentage of people voting in favor of an issue for it to pass. If the 1% initiative passes, it changes to 2/3 of those qualified to vote. Now, that might mean registered voters or anyone over the age of 18. Now, for an example, any name that is still on the voter registration list would then count. The voter registrar purges the list every couple of years. In 1990, 8,000 names were purged.
So you're indicating that people who had died or had moved away would be counted
Exactly.
and therefore make a levy almost impossible.
Absolutely. Anytime those people would be counted if they've moved or they've died, their name is still on there. It's a slap in the face of the democratic process.
We only have about 30 seconds left. Jack, do you have any other comments to close out for your side of the argument?
Real quickly, Tony, we're not trying to tell your audience how to vote. We just want them to understand the concerns that Lori and I have and our coalition has against this 1% initiative. Real quickly, from a business standpoint, if we were facing the 1% initiative today, I can guarantee you a quality company like Harper's would not be looking at Coeur d'Alene, Idaho as a place to locate 600 quality, new, diversified type jobs.
So you're saying it's hard to get jobs into the state under that system?
It definitely will be. Who would want to join that?
I've gotten the signal we're out of time, and we have given both sides hopefully an equal amount of time. That's what we intended to do, and we thank you for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, for the last 30 minutes you've been hearing about the 1% initiative on the ballot in Idaho on November the 3rd. Thank you for being with us, and please be with us again next week at this same time when we will discuss another ballot issue for the November election. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.